This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the platform that makes building a website or online store simple. Hey everyone, so I've been saying for a long while now that I believe the raid will end in failure. If you're new to my channel, then what I mean by that is that I believe that the Straw Hats will not defeat Kaido and the Beast Pirates over the course of the Onigashima battle, and that the Straw Hat Alliance will actually be defeated here instead. And today I'm going to give you my final reasons for why I still, even at this point, still believe this will be the case. I know I've said that this will be my final video on the topic before, but this will be my final video on the topic, okay? And after that, I'll just wait and see how this plays out. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Now, this video will not be 100% comprehensive because I have made multiple videos already in the past over this, and I'm not trying to just rehash points. So I strongly encourage you to watch the first few videos on the topic to get the full picture, especially these two. In the original raid failing video, I went over why it makes sense in terms of story structure for the raid to fail, basically how Oda usually structures One Piece arcs, especially major One Piece arcs, as well as how narrative structure works in general, all of which would point to the raid failing here. The second video goes over hanging plot threads that have yet to be addressed, so basically missing pieces. And finally, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about mostly from the perspective of characters, so why it would make sense for most characters for the arc to not end here. Then some writing irregularities, so basically choices Oda has made writing-wise that are a little strange if this is the final battle. And finally, just some more missing plot points. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to run your own online business, if you want a website for your physical business, if you just want to get your name out there and start building some online persona for yourself today, then you should be using Squarespace. In my experience marketing, I've had to use a lot of different website builders for a lot of different clients before, and Squarespace is easily the fastest to pick up and the easiest to use, while still making the website look really professional. For example, sometimes incorporating polished looking image or video galleries can be really messy on other website tools, but Squarespace makes it really straightforward and seamlessly integrates these elements. So YouTube, Vimeo, whatever you want to incorporate into your site, it's going to be easy with Squarespace. You can get your free trial for Squarespace today by going to squarespace.com. And when you're ready to launch, use squarespace.com/MrMorge to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that aside, first off, in terms of characters. So a lot of people have told me that the raid can't fail because then all of this setup and time spent is wasted. I have personally never viewed that as a good criticism because setup is never about the number of chapters. For instance, Arlong Park is a very short arc, but in that time we get a significant amount of character focus and emotional conflict among the Straw Hats that culminates in an extremely powerful dramatic climax that sets up an extremely personal driving force for the crew to take down the Arlong Pirates no matter what. In this case, if you wrote this sequence of events and then had Luffy and the Straw Hats lose to Arlong, then that would undoubtedly be a terrible waste of dramatic setup, because you've gotten all the main characters to the perfect point you would want them at, with all the necessary drama fueling them personally heading into the finale. Wasted setup is never about the number of chapters, the same way it is not a waste for Oda to spend 70 chapters making it seem like Luffy is going to save Ace, and then Ace ultimately dying anyway, because everyone acknowledges that the dramatic fuel this provides for the story going forward is infinitely better than if Luffy did just save Ace and moved on from there. So it's not about the number of chapters and never has been, in my opinion. After all, every single arc of the New World has been built up towards Wano, so you would naturally expect Wano to be a longer storyline, maybe a significantly longer storyline than normal, and telling a complete story is what is more important in the end. So looking at the actual setup for the main characters of the story, what's interesting to me about Wano is that you can separate the major players into two groups, the Scabbards and the non-Scabbards. And the way Oda wrote Wano seems to be, to me, was for Act 2 to be extremely Scabbard-centric and Act 3 to be the closing point for a lot of the Scabbard storylines. But at the same time, Oda is using Act 3 to now open up a lot of character storylines for the rest of the cast. So kind of a transition of completing the storylines of the Scabbards and kicking off the character arcs for the Straw Hats, but also for characters like Momonosuke and Yamato and so on. To me, that makes sense if Oda's intent is to have the early stages of Wano be about giving us the background exposition and lore of the nation, largely developing through focus on the Scabbards, with the Straw Hats mainly as background characters, then getting to the first main fight, where now through a major defeat, we will get the ball rolling for the Straw Hats as well as other major characters to start their storylines, and then a final battle where the Straw Hats and other remaining main characters, having risen back up from that defeat, finally take down Kaido. So if that sounds weird, let me just go down the list. For the Scabbards in general, it does feel like pretty much everything set up for them is pretty much resolving here. We're getting their fights, their heroic sacrifices, some deaths pending confirmation, and so on. The Scabbards are getting the payoff of setup from the earlier acts, but when I look at other characters, it feels like their storylines are having their seeds planted here rather than being the payoff of setup from the earlier acts. So, starting with Zoro. I think Zoro is one of the stronger cases for why this arc is likely going to have more to go. The seeds of Zoro's storyline seem to have only just been planted. There are strong hints that Zoro is a Shimotsuki, and a sort of lost son of Wano. You would expect a storyline to come out of this, possibly a backstory, but at the very least delving into the significance of what that means for his character, what sort of responsibility or destiny comes with that. Unless of course you believe Zoro being a Shimotsuki is simply a fun fact, like a piece of trivia that Oda is just including towards the end for no reason. Unless you believe that, then by all accounts we should be expecting this to be the starting point of what we would expect to be an exploration of, essentially, who is Zoro? Keep in mind, Zoro had no real storyline in Act 1 or 2. He had things to do, but that's not the same as a storyline, and the only thing that seemed somewhat set up for him as a motivation was a drive to kill Orochi, but strangely that has not come up yet either. But this Shimotsuki point feels like a real jumping off point for much more, which would be odd to introduce if the arc is about to end. Not to mention Nidai Kitetsu, the sword that most people seem to forget about, that most of us seem to initially believe by consensus would be a weapon that Zoro acquires this arc, that has been, interestingly, kept to the side for the time being. It's not yet time for that to come into Zoro's storyline for whatever reason. And lastly, we have only just been introduced to the fact that Zoro has Conqueror's Haki, and he himself seems to be not fully aware of it, or at the very least it doesn't seem like he can draw on it on a whim, which is extremely interesting considering the way Zoro's storyline in Wano seemed to be set up, of finally coming into his own as a leader, and the way Zoro himself seemed to hint in Act 2 at the storyline of having to actually step up as a leader. So a lot of factors at play hovering around Zoro at the moment. The reveal that he is actually a descendant of Wano's ruling class, developing Conqueror's Haki, and a potential for leadership being hinted at repeatedly, and a sword that has yet to be acquired. Not to mention the fact that nothing from his character motivations in Act 2 have come into play yet. It really feels to me that there should be a lot more to Zoro's story here than just beating King in a fight, and then that's the end. Secondly, as I recently talked about, Sanji and his Germa development. So obviously, getting Germa abilities and coming to terms with them finally gives Sanji a storyline for this arc, so what this arc seems to be out for Sanji has again only just been planted. Now, you could say that this will just resolve itself during the Queen fight, and Sanji should come to terms with it right here. But I think it's almost impossible to do that well in a single chapter of beating Queen, considering it took literally 80 chapters to construct this message for Sanji's character, that he is better off being true to himself, being kind, human, emotional, etc., than being cold, rigid, perfect soldiers like the rest of his family. And again, to save you the trouble of rereading Whole Cake Island, it's not as simple as saying, well, Sanji could be kind and emotional while also fighting with Germa's abilities, as that's kind of missing the point of what the abilities represented in the first place. So the genetic enhancements that made the Germa super soldiers, and the fact that Sanji did not have those enhancements and was a normal human, that was reflective of the fact that the Vinsmokes were all about emotionless, cold-hearted values, and Sanji was about kindness and human values. So the entire point of Sanji's rejection of Germa science and proving he could be just as great without it was a metaphor for the rejection of those cold, emotionless soldier values and proof of the value of just being a kind, emotional human being. So there is a lot of meaning attached to being like Germa and having those enhancements. So however it is dealt with and developed needs to be treated with similar attention that went into developing the messaging for Sanji in Whole Cake Island in the first place. Not saying 80 chapters again, but just saying it would be crazy for it to happen in like the same length of time it took for like Frankie versus Sasaki. Now I have heard people say that well, Chopper could tell Sanji it's okay to be a monster for Luffy, and that would actually be the perfect example of a really crude, rushed way to resolve this situation, as what people miss about this Chopper moment is that the majority of the groundwork for it was done through Drum Kingdom, the arc where Chopper realized that Luffy didn't care that he was a monster and welcomed him for what he was, and Chopper found acceptance through that, and so naturally over time that could develop into the realization that who cares if others think he is a monster, since the majority of the groundwork was already done for that, for him having a family that accepts him for who he is in his origin arc. Aside from Zoro and Sanji, who at least have some clear jumping off points for character storylines here that would indicate a longer arc, the rest of the Straw Hats seem to have pretty much nothing going from them from the start of Wano to this point, so a defeat here could do wonders for everyone. I'm not going to use that as evidence that, the raid's going to fail, as it is entirely possible that Oda just wrote an arc where the Straw Hats were pretty much ignored from start to finish, except for getting, a one-chapter courtesy fight that didn't really do anything for their characters. But I'm going to stick to things that indicate there will actually be a longer arc, so I'm going to stick to talking about characters where it seems like Oda is clearly setting up for more for their storylines here. And I'll leave it at saying that it would obviously be very nice for the rest of the crew if the raid failed, as they could finally get some dramatic focus in the fallout of the defeat, but again, that's not proof that it will happen. Now, moving on to Yamato. Literally everything about Yamato to me seems like a character that is set up to have a significant character arc, and one that doesn't conceivably make sense to happen just in the rest of the Onigashima battle. For starters, Yamato was literally introduced this battle, so we're very literally getting the start of her character's storyline here in Act 3. And on top of that, Yamato is a character starting from a place that is clearly very, very, very far from where we would expect her to ultimately be. This obsession with Odin, a figure that she believes she literally needs to become to the point of honestly near delusion, Yamato is clearly written to be very naive and one-dimensional in her thinking. So there's a lot that needs to happen to develop this character and get her out of that. And with this chapter of Yamato versus Kaido, it was very important because it essentially served to set up the first simple building block of character growth in place. It simply established the why. Why does Yamato believe the things she believes? So that is basically ground zero, step one. It takes us from seeing an odd character to at least understanding a bit of why this odd character is the way that they are. From there on, that's where you can start actually having a character arc. So keep in mind, Yamato's character arc has not actually started yet at all. We need to take Yamato from believing she needs to be Odin to breaking free of this obsession and having some kind of revelation, which requires some significant storytelling considering how deeply dug in she is to this belief. So if you believe that Luffy versus Kaido that is happening right now is the end of this entire Wano arc, that wouldn't make a lot of sense considering where a major character like Yamato is at the moment. Very similar to Momonosuke, who has also in Act 3 finally begun his character arc. Act 2 was us getting hints of how Momonosuke may be feeling and the pressures that he is under, but Act 3 is sort of the start of Momonosuke's evolution, with him acknowledging that he is not his father, with him forcing himself over and over to be brave, and this great step forward seems set to happen with him holding Onigashima up. However, is being brave the entirety of Momonosuke's arc? No, most of his arc setup seemed to be framed around leadership and actually leading his people in battle. Why do I say that? Because 1, it plays into the parallel of Momonosuke succeeding where his father failed, so essentially being what his father was not, meaning being a true leader of the people of Wano. Odin preferred to do everything very privately and by himself, and on top of that, it is based on Momonosuke's desires himself, him stating that he is wanted above all else to actually be able to lead his people in battle and not just be a figurehead. He feels he must fight in this war. So not just recreating his father's moment, but actually being the leader for his people that Odin wasn't. And guess what is waiting for Momonosuke that he hasn't picked up yet? Ame no Habakiri. Once he believed that he was not ready for it. But adult Momonosuke, having taken that step of bravery forward, protecting the people of Wano from Onigashima falling on them, adult Momonosuke finally getting to fight in the war like he knew he had to from the start, wielding Ame no Habakiri because he is finally ready and worthy to do so. All of that makes sense for Act 4 and onwards of Wano. And next up we have the characters that are all still missing, that clearly have storylines waiting to be picked up in Wano. So Hiyori first and foremost. Where is she? What is in store for her? This character is clearly set up as one of the pivotal figures of Wano. Many believe that she represents the blue pheasant in the story of Momotaro, the same way that Luffy represents the monkey and Yamato the dog. So in that case, why has Oda kept her separate from the events of Act 3 if this is the final battle. Same with Toki, who I think most people would agree makes sense to return to the story, considering she is a huge missing plot thread with her history of the Void Century and insight into the importance of Wano. And finally, Hitetsu Tenguyama. Who is he? Who is this guy he is waiting for? There are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding this character. Lastly, I'd add that it seems extremely important to me for Kid that the raid fails so that he can actually get some story space to be focused on, because if it's all ending here with Kid just beating Big Mom so that Kid just gets someone to beat, I think it would be really crude. But again, that's more of a personal preference. That's not really a reason I can point to in the story as, a clearly set up plotline for Kid that needs to be developed further. I just think it would be really good for his character. Now, these final two characters I want to talk about are Luffy and Kaido, and this leads me to the next general topic, which is irregularities in the writing. Basically odd choices Oda seems to be making that you wouldn't expect if this was the end of the arc. So with Kaido, it may seem minor, but I think it's very interesting that Oda kept Kaido very separate from the story in Act 1 and Act 2, really just having him swoop in to one-shot Luffy. So for the most part, Act 3 has really served as our introduction to Kaido. And most importantly, we are still waiting on learning about Kaido's motivations, which Oda is keeping under wraps so far. Generally, we do learn about the villain's motivations earlier in the arc, but it seems like Luffy is in his final fight against Kaido with that question still up in the air. And on Luffy's end, there are two strange ways Oda has handled what we'd normally expect for Luffy over the course of the story. So Luffy has been defeated twice, that's true. But the purpose of Oda having Luffy defeated is usually so that Oda can shake Luffy up a bit. The way Oda has had Luffy defeated so far, both times, has been different in that he's made sure to skip the part where we see Luffy experiencing the defeat. The first time was a one-shot, which was really cool and unexpected, but also allowed us to gloss over a real prolonged confrontation between Luffy and Kaido, where Luffy experiences the difference in strength or is affected by it. And the second loss was also off-screen, even though Luffy was shown doing well beforehand. So because the losses happened in this way, Oda was able to technically have Luffy lose twice, while circumventing the experience of the loss. If you compare this to moments like Crocodile or Lucci, what's important is not just the loss, but getting to see Luffy lose, and having him experience the loss, as that scene is usually what provides the dramatic momentum for the comeback. For instance, seeing Luffy in low spirits after the Lucci defeat is what makes for the powerful resurgence of him getting fired up again when his drive returns. Oda has been very deliberate so far, with making Luffy vs Kaido so far feature only confidence for Luffy, with the losses being irrelevant and not affecting his spirit whatsoever, essentially just checking off a box that yes, Luffy was technically defeated twice. Even Kaido himself speaks on this, that defeating Luffy the second time was pretty much meaningless, as it literally wouldn't have any effect on the Alliance unless they saw it. So not only did that defeat do nothing for Luffy, it did nothing for the tone of the arc or attitude of the Alliance either, as they pretty much immediately shrugged it off exactly as Kaido expected. And that also plays into the other aspect that usually is treated very differently, which is Luffy's triumphant return. No matter what, throughout the story in pretty much every arc, Oda likes to set things up such that Luffy is removed from the action for a while, so that the villain has free reign to do whatever they want. The tone becomes extremely dark and heavy, all characters are made to feel that there is no hope, and then, and only then, does Luffy make his triumphant return to the battle to take on the villain. I mean, the chapter of Luffy's return after his big defeat against Crocodile is literally called Hope, because Oda sets things up for Luffy to return from his defeat at a point where all hope seems lost. Now, in Onigashima, things were pretty much perfectly fine when Luffy got back. In fact, everyone was actually doing really well and there was an air of positivity on the Alliance's side, not to mention Kaido himself wasn't really stirring up any trouble. So in Wano so far, not only do things not really change when Luffy is defeated, Luffy's return is practically inconsequential as well. On top of that, the way the fights against the Tobiropo were won by the Straw Hats felt deliberately surface level. So whereas One Piece fights normally aim to communicate a story through the fight, and that is generally the greatest strength of their fights, for example, Chopper forcing himself to become a monster, Nami resolving to become a combatant for the crew and actually start contributing through fighting, Usopp having to find the hero within him, etc. And when I say story, it doesn't even necessarily have to mean a character arc during the fight. A story for the fight can be something as simple as Franky versus Fukuro, with it starting with Franky accepting Fukuro's back and forth macho contest at the start of their fight, then Franky slowly realizing he's gotten in over his head and he can't win, then Franky's new challenge being to find some cola so that he can turn the fight around, then finally achieving the goal of getting the cola and showing us what a fully powered cola Franky could do, and then a final rush of exchanging abilities between Franky and Fukuro before Franky finally wins. Now on the other hand, Franky vs Sasaki was basically like if you just had that end bit of Franky vs Fukuro. Oda didn't write a real story to that fight, he just had some exchanges of wacky abilities and then Franky won. So the Jinbei fight is an even better example of this when there was clearly no story to the fight. It was pretty much exclusively an exposition drop about the sun god Nika, with Jinbei mostly listening and then finishing the fight when the exposition dump was over. Nami vs Ulti was obviously literally not even a fight, which leaves basically only Robin vs Black Maria as a fight with a nice storyline for the character. So technically, the Tobiroppo were defeated and several Straw Hats got fights, but they were definitely a far cry from traditional One Piece fights, such that many readers, if you remember, found it very hard to believe that the Tobiroppo were even actually defeated at the time, and I would personally hope and expect that there is more to it than that for the Tobiroppo. But if that seems too hopeful to say that it's really a writing irregularity the way the Tobiroppo were defeated, and that could instead be chalked up as, just bad fights rather than Oda actually setting up for a resurgence of the Tobiroppo, then what about something as simple as last chapter's threat of the bombs? Yamato established that if Onigashima were to fall, then the bombs would cause a massive explosion. However, Yamato then said that she would go and defuse the bombs. So think about that a little bit. Why have that angle of introducing the bombs, but then also have Yamato defuse the bombs? So to understand what I mean, let's assume that the raid failing means Onigashima coming down. Assume that those are one and the same. That makes sense, as you wouldn't write a big victory for the Straw Hats with a giant symbol of the villain coming to rest at the center of Wano and destroying the flower capital underneath. Let's assume if Onigashima is coming down, then Kaido just won, because it is literally Kaido's goal for Onigashima to come down at the flower capital, right? So, if success for the alliance means that Momonosuke will hold up Onigashima and that the island won't come down, then sure. Saying that there are bombs in Onigashima is great, as it adds to the threat of this doomsday scenario that will be prevented, because no matter what, the island cannot come down, Momonosuke is going to hold it up. In this scenario, the author would never disarm the bombs, as that's diffusing some of the drama for no reason. If Oda is never going to have the island of Onigashima come down anyway, then why defuse the bombs to neuter the threat of it? You would want to make Momonosuke holding up the Onigashima island that much more impactful. Now, on the other hand, if the island is going to come down, then introducing the added factor of the bombs and the need to defuse the bombs makes a lot more sense. It would make Momonosuke holding up the island temporarily carry a lot more drama, as it would be giving not only the people of the flower capital time to escape, it would mean that Momonosuke has a time limit. He has to hold up Onigashima until the bombs are defused. After that, the island can come crashing down, but it would be relatively safe. The alliance would still be defeated, Kaido would have won the round, but he didn't just nuke all of Wano in a giant explosion in the process. Basically simple writing scenario. If a calamity is going to occur and the heroes are going to stop it, you never want to neuter the potential impact of what would happen if the heroes lost, since that takes away from the drama of the heroes stopping it in the first place. Lastly, this isn't necessarily a writing irregularity, but it is interesting to me that Oda had Orochi start the fire specifically to force all of the main characters to gather in one place on the live floor. Again, Kaido said that defeating Luffy would have no impact on the Alliance's hopes unless they actually saw Luffy defeated. And right now, everything is perfectly lined up, with Luffy and Kaido fighting 1v1 on the roof, directly above where everyone has been forced to gather in the live floor below thanks to the fire that Orochi introduced. Meaning, if Kaido defeats Luffy and sends him down to the live floor below, it would resolve the statement of Kaido's of actually showing everyone a defeated Luffy, which would hopefully finally have some sort of impact. Not to mention, it lines up perfectly with the idea of Onigashima coming down. Visual symbolism of Luffy coming down through the roof to crash into the live floor, with Onigashima likely simultaneously coming down to crush the flower capital. Maybe Kaido defeating Luffy is literally the last decisive blow that sends Onigashima plummeting. Now finally, let me address some hanging plot points. Again, reminder that Kabuki plays have 5 acts, with the third act generally being the act of tragedy, the third act has not ended yet, therefore we are still waiting on the tragedy, which again I believe will be the defeat of the Straw Hat Alliance. There were some rumors that started that this 5-act structure isn't true, and Kabuki plays actually have 3 acts, but then this was clarified that Kabuki plays do in fact have 5 acts. Some have 3, but samurai plays have 5, and Wano is clearly a samurai storyline. Then other hanging plot threads are that Hawkins initially gave us a 1-month timeline for the arc, which would indicate a second half to it. The Big Mom pirates have yet to arrive, the missing poneglyph has yet to be addressed, the Kakeshi dolls in the Flower Capital are still a mystery, we still don't know the importance of Wano itself, Joy Boy, or what Onigashima is, and finally the Marines showing up does provide a necessary third party to take Kaido and Big Mom's attention away from the Straw Hat Alliance should the raid fail, giving the remnants of the Alliance room to get away. So, all that being said, does that mean that the raid is going to fail? I still think it will. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, I will obviously put out a video fully acknowledging that I was wrong and talking about the whole arc. But if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon for my extended thoughts on this and all future topics.